Have you ever stood in a crowded room feeling utterly invisible? I have. It was supposed to be a joyous celebration. My father-in-law Richard's 70th birthday. The elegant country club dining room sparkled with gold balloons and vintage photographs, spanning 7 decades. Everyone laughed and reminisced except me. I'm Claire. I'm 35, a teacher, a wife, a mother. But that day, I was nobody. Just a shadow lingering near the appetizer table, watching my husband's family celebrate without us. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When I finally gathered the courage to ask my mother-in-law, Patricia, where Lily, my daughter, and I should sit, she barely glanced up from adjusting a photo display. "Just keep her occupied somewhere, Claire," she whispered tersely. "You know how these events are. Children tend to disrupt the flow." Disrupt the flow? That's what my 8-year-old daughter had become to her own family. An inconvenience. Clenched my jaw, fighting the tightness building in my throat. I refused to let Lily see me upset. Not today. She stood beside me in her new emerald green dress that matched her eyes perfectly, the one she'd selected after 3 shopping trips. Because Grandpa always says green is his favorite color. She nervously twisted the handmade card in her hands, the edges already softening from her anxious fingers. She had been so excited for weeks. She had practiced a poem she wrote specifically for Richard. She had memorized the names of his childhood, friends from the stories he'd told her, wanting to recognize them if they attended. She had even asked me to help her style her hair like Grandpa's mom, after seeing an old photograph he kept on his desk. I knelt down and straightened Lily's dress collar, tucking a stray auburn curl behind her ear. I smiled, a stretched, too thin smile that didn't reach my eyes, and said, "We're going to have a wonderful time, sweetheart. Just, you wait." But inside, my heart was splintering into pieces, because it didn't matter how much I smiled. It didn't matter that I had been the one who drove Richard to his medical appointments after his knee surgery, listened to his war stories when everyone else had heard them too many times, or helped Patricia organize this very celebration for weeks. None of it mattered now. The photographer was arranging the family for the main portrait. Richard stood proudly in the center, beaming in his navy blazer with a golden 70 pin on the lapel. Patricia stood beside him, elegantly dressed in cream silk, making sure his boutonniere was perfectly aligned. My husband Michael lurked awkwardly, at the edge of the group, checking his phone, clearly uncomfortable with the formality, but included nonetheless. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and Richard's golf buddies arranged themselves around the guest of honor. And there we were, Lily and I, standing off to the side, watching, waiting for someone to say, "Claire, Lily, come join us." Waiting for someone to remember we existed. They didn't. The photographer gestured for anyone not immediately related to step aside. I opened my mouth to protest. We were family too. But Patricia caught my eye and subtly shook her head. Small, sharp, final. Lily tugged at my sleeve. "Mommy, why aren't we in the picture?" she whispered, her small voice catching. I crouched down to her level, my throat constricting painfully. "Because sometimes we're just the audience, sweetie, and that's okay." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. I straightened up and clapped my hands together as if we were about to start a fun game. "Let's go find some of those chocolate-covered strawberries you love," I said, my voice artificially bright. But as we turned away, Lily kept glancing over. Her shoulder, confusion and hurt blooming across her freckled face. I should have left. I should have taken Lily's hand and walked out of that country club without a backward glance. But some desperate, hopeful part of me wanted to believe things would improve as the afternoon progressed. That someone, Michael, Richard, anyone, would notice our exclusion. I didn't know then that it wouldn't be me who changed everything. It would be Lily, my 8-year-old daughter who recognized an injustice no adult dared to acknowledge. My daughter who refused to let this family write us out of their story. And just when Richard was about to give his thank you speech, with everyone's attention focused on the small podium at the front of the room, Lily did something I will never forget. She walked straight up to her grandfather, clutching her handmade, card-like armor. And with the steadiest, clearest voice I have ever heard from her, she said, "Grandpa, before you talk, I think everyone should hear about what you taught me." The entire room fell silent, and in that silence, everything changed. Growing up, I never expected family dynamics to be so complicated. I was raised in a home where Sunday dinners meant mismatched chairs pulled up to an overcrowded table, where there was always room for one more, where nobody worried about proper seating arrangements or photo aesthetics. Then I met Michael during my final year of college. Charming, intelligent, from a good family, as my mother would say. I fell in love with his quiet humor, his thoughtfulness, his dreams of becoming an architect like his father. What I didn't fully understand then was how different our families were. The Harrisons had traditions that spanned generations, unspoken rules that everyone somehow knew without being told. There were proper ways to fold napkins, appropriate topics for dinner conversation, and implicit hierarchies that determined who spoke when. I tried to learn, to adapt, to become the kind of daughter-in-law who wouldn't embarrass Michael. Patricia made it abundantly clear what role I was expected to play. When I spoke too loudly at a family gathering, she would wince, slightly. When I brought the wrong dish to a holiday meal, she would rearrange the table to make it less visible. When I dressed too casually for a family photo, she would suggest, firmly but with a perfect smile, that perhaps I could wait and take a fun, informal shot later. I told myself it didn't matter. I convinced myself that acceptance didn't need to be demonstrative. Love didn't always look the way I expected it to. But as years passed, the distance between me and the Harrington family seemed to widen rather than close. After Lily was born, I hoped things would change. How could they not adore this perfect, curious child with Michael's nose and my laughing eyes? And Richard, strong, traditional Richard, did seem to soften around his granddaughter. He would sneak her extra dessert when Patricia wasn't looking, tell her stories of his childhood that I'd never heard him share with anyone else, keep small trinkets in his pocket just to delight her with magic when she visited. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Meanwhile, Patricia remained coolly affectionate, buying expensive outfits that were beautiful but impractical, arranging professionally photographed portraits that captured Lily's features but somehow missed her spirit, organizing playdates with suitable children from families they'd known for generations. And Michael, caught between his upbringing and his own family, tried to bridge worlds that seemed increasingly irreconcilable. Still, I persisted in maintaining these family connections. No matter how uncomfortable the Sunday lunches or holiday gatherings became, I showed up. Every birthday, every anniversary, every impromptu family dinner, when Richard wanted his favorite pot roast that only I seemed to make to his liking. I was there. Because that's what you do for family. You show up, even when they don't fully see you. When Richard announced his desire for a proper celebration for his 70th birthday, it didn't surprise me that Patricia took complete control of the planning. What did surprise me was how she gradually excluded me from the process. Initially, she asked for my help with the guest list since I had organized Richard's retirement party years earlier. But as weeks passed, my calls about venue options went unreturned. My suggestions about Richard's favorite music were acknowledged with vague, "we'll see" responses. The invitation arrived at our house addressed only to Michael Harrington and family, as if I were an anonymous extension rather than Claire, his wife of 12 years. When I mentioned these small cuts to Michael, he sighed heavily. "You know how Mom gets about these things. It's easier just to let her handle it. Dad doesn't care about the details anyway." But the details mattered. The systematic erasure mattered. The message it sent to our daughter mattered. A week before the birthday celebration, I called Patricia to confirm if there was anything special we should know. Dress code, schedule, seating arrangements. That's when she sighed that particular sigh I'd come to recognize over the years. Just make sure Lily isn't too energetic, she said, as if discussing a troublesome pet rather than her granddaughter. Richard wants a sophisticated affair. Children tend to draw attention away from the guest of honor. I nearly hung up. I nearly said we wouldn't attend. But then I glanced into the living room where Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully writing in her special card for Grandpa. She had collected small memories on each page: the time he taught her to fish, the secret handshake they shared, the nickname he called her that no one else used. She was humming softly, completely unaware of the conversation happening in the kitchen. She deserved to celebrate her grandfather, even in an environment that didn't fully welcome her. So I told Patricia we would be there, appropriately dressed and well-behaved. The morning of the birthday celebration, Lily woke up earlier than usual. She laid her dress on her bed with careful precision, placed her shiny shoes exactly parallel beside it, and asked me 3 separate times if her card was fancy enough for such an important day. I assured her that everything was perfect, because it was, and because regardless of what happened at that party, I needed her to know that her efforts, her love, her very presence was more than enough. As we drove to the country club, a sprawling stone building with manicured gardens and a circular driveway lined with luxury cars, I kept reminding myself that today wasn't about me, or even about Lily. It was about Richard and his milestone birthday. We would sit quietly, smile appropriately, and celebrate his life. We would be the ideal guests, even if we were treated like strangers. But as we pulled into the parking lot and I saw the uniformed staff directing guests, the professional photographer, already capturing arrivals, the elaborate balloon arch framing the entrance, a knot formed in my stomach. I glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror. She sat tall in her booster seat, her card clutched carefully between both hands, her eyes wide with anticipation. I smiled at her reflection, but inside, something cold and certain settled into place. This day was not going to unfold the way I had hoped. And deep down, a small, rebellious voice whispered, "Maybe it's not supposed to." When we entered the country club, the banquet hall was already half filled with guests. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in cream linens. Centerpieces of golden roses and black and white photographs of Richard throughout his life adorned. Each table, a string quartet played softly from a corner, their classical melodies providing a refined soundtrack to the gentle murmur of conversation. I held Lily's hand tightly as we navigated toward the welcome table staffed by Patricia's garden club friends. They consulted their meticulously organized list, found our names near the bottom, and handed me a small cream envelope without meeting my eyes. "Family is seated near the front," one woman said automatically before turning to greet the guests, behind us with considerably more enthusiasm. I opened the envelope and found our table assignment, number 14. As we made our way through the room, I quickly realized that tables 1 through 5 surrounded the guest of honor. Table 14 was positioned near the service entrance, partially obscured by a large floral arrangement. Michael was nowhere to be seen, likely pulled into the pre-event family photographs I hadn't been informed about. Lily looked around with wide eyes, taking in the elegant surroundings. "Is this where kings have parties?" she whispered, clutching my hand tighter. Despite everything, her question made me smile genuinely. "It does look like that, doesn't it?" I smoothed her hair gently. "Very fancy." We found our assigned table, already occupied by distant relatives who barely acknowledged our arrival. A second cousin of Patricia's and his wife whom I'd met only once before, an elderly aunt who seemed confused about who I was, and 2 family, friends who were deep in conversation about golf memberships. They nodded politely when we sat down but quickly returned to their previous discussions. Lily carefully placed her card on her bread plate, making sure the corners aligned perfectly. "When can I give this to Grandpa?" she asked, her excitement undimmed by our cold reception. I forced a smile. "Soon, sweetheart. Once everyone has arrived." I scanned the room for Michael and finally spotted him near the entrance, greeting guests alongside his parents, laughing at something Richard's brother had said. He looked up briefly, caught my eye, and gave a small wave that seemed to say, "I'll join you later." But I knew later might never come in these carefully orchestrated events. The celebration proceeded with military precision. Guests arrived, champagne flowed, photographs were taken in strategic groupings. Richard held court at the center of it all, sharing stories with old friends, accepting congratulations with gracious handshakes. Patricia orchestrated the event like a symphony conductor, her subtle gestures directing staff, guiding conversations, ensuring everything appeared effortless. After the appetizers were served and the first round of toasts completed, the photographer began organizing guests for more structured photos. "Harrington family members, please gather near the fireplace," he called out. Lily perked up immediately, already sliding off her chair in anticipation. I followed her, watching as Richard, Patricia, Michael, his sister Charlotte and her husband, their 2 teenage sons, Richard's brother and sister-in-law, and various other relatives arranged themselves in a carefully composed tableau of family. When Lily and I approached the group, Patricia stepped forward slightly. "Claire, dear," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "perhaps you could take a few photos with your phone while we do the family shots. Then we'll do some casual ones afterward." I stood frozen, her words hanging in the air. Between us. Family shots. As if we weren't family. As if the gold band on my finger and the child who shared their blood meant nothing in this carefully curated narrative. Lily looked up at me, confusion clouding her face. "But we're family too. Right, Mommy?" Before I could respond, the photographer interjected kindly but firmly. "Let's start with immediate family first. Then we'll expand outward." He gestured for us to step aside, clearly following directions he'd been given earlier. Patricia gave me a tight smile that seemed to say, "Thank you for understanding," before turning back to arrange Michael's tie and Charlotte's children in perfect symmetry around Richard. I felt Lily's small hand slip into mine. "Why can't we be in the picture?" she whispered, hurt evident in every syllable. I crouched down beside her, struggling to find words that wouldn't further wound her already bruised heart. "They're doing different groups," I explained softly. "We'll have our turn." But we both knew it was a lie. There would be no turn for us, no space in this perfect family portrait. I stood watching as the camera captured image after image of the Harrington family, laughing, posed, serious, candid, feeling increasingly like a stranger who had wandered into the wrong event. Lily's shoulders slumped slightly, her earlier, excitement dimming with each click of the camera that excluded us. When the photographs ended, guests began to migrate toward their assigned tables for the main course. Michael finally made his way to our table, dropping into the seat beside me with an exhausted sigh. "Quite the production," he murmured, loosening, his tie slightly. "Mom's outdone herself." I wanted to confront him, to ask why he hadn't insisted we be included, why he stood silently while his wife and daughter were systematically erased from his family narrative. But this wasn't the time or place. Instead, I simply asked, "Did the photos turn out well?" "Oh, you know how these things go," he replied vaguely, already distracted by a colleague calling his name from across the room. "I should go say hello to the Petersons. Dad's hoping to get their support for the hospital fundraiser." And just like that, he was gone again, swallowed by the crowd of people who apparently mattered more. The meal was served with impeccable timing. Classic filet mignon for the adults, chicken fingers and fries for the children at other tables, though Lily had been served the adult meal despite her age. Another small oversight that spoke volumes. She picked at her food quietly, her earlier enthusiasm now replaced with a subdued watchfulness that broke my heart. The real blow came during the speeches. One by one, family members and friends stood to honor Richard, praising his business acumen, his community leadership, his role as patriarch of the esteemed Harrington family. Charlotte spoke eloquently about her father's guidance throughout her life. Michael delivered a polished speech about Richard's legacy in the architectural firm they now shared. Patricia recounted charming anecdotes from their 50 years of marriage. Not once was I mentioned. Not once was Lily acknowledged as the granddaughter who spent hours listening to Richard's stories when others had grown tired of them. Not once was our branch of the family tree recognized in this orchard of accomplishments and memories. As the speeches concluded and the master of ceremonies announced that Richard would now say a few words, I found myself blinking back tears. I hadn't expected to be featured prominently, but the complete erasure felt deliberate, surgical in its precision. I leaned toward Lily and whispered, "Maybe we should get some fresh air after Grandpa's speech." But Lily wasn't listening. Her gaze was fixed on her grandfather as he moved toward the small podium, her expression shifting from hurt to something else entirely: determination. Before I could process what was happening, she slid from her chair, gripping her handmade card, with white knuckles, and began walking purposefully toward the front of the room. My heart leapt into my throat. "Lily," I called softly, half rising from my seat. But she continued forward, her small figure in emerald green moving with unwavering resolve through the forest of tables and guests. And in that moment, the entire trajectory of the day, of our place in this family, suddenly pivoted on the courage of an 8-year-old girl. At first, I thought she was simply going to hand Richard her card before he began speaking. It would be slightly out of order according to Patricia's carefully planned schedule, but surely excusable from a young grandchild. But as I watched Lily approach the podium, I saw a composure in her small shoulders that transcended her years. This wasn't a child seeking attention. This was someone with purpose. I stood up quickly, my chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. Heads turned in my direction, frowns of disapproval at the disruption momentarily shifting focus from the guest of honor. But those looks quickly redirected as Lily reached Richard at the podium. He looked down, surprised but pleased to see his granddaughter approaching. He bent slightly, clearly expecting to receive the card and send her back to her seat with a quick pat on the head. Instead, Lily spoke, not in the whisper adults expected from children in formal settings, but in a clear, steady voice that somehow carried throughout the now hushed banquet hall. "Grandpa, before you talk, I think everyone should hear about what you taught me." Richard blinked in surprise, his prepared speech momentarily forgotten. The room held its collective breath, uncertain how to react to this unexpected interruption. Patricia took a half-step forward, her perfect hostess smile faltering, but Richard gently raised his hand to stop her. "What's that, Lily Pad?" he asked, using the nickname only he ever called her. Lily took a deep breath, unfolding her handmade card, but instead of simply handing it over, she began to speak, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Grandpa told me that the most important things in life aren't things at all," she said. "They're the moments when nobody's looking, but you show up anyway." From my position halfway between our distant table and the podium, I froze, unsure whether to rush forward or let this moment unfold. Lily had everyone's attention now, some faces curious, others uncomfortable, a few already softening at the sight of this small girl addressing a room full of adults. "When I was 5, Lily continued, her finger carefully tracing the words, she'd written, "I fell off the swing in Grandpa's garden and got a big scrape. Everyone was busy inside with a fancy lunch, but Grandpa left to sit with me under the oak tree. He told me about when he was little and broke his arm falling from the same tree, and how being brave isn't about not crying. It's about getting back up even when it hurts." Richard's expression changed subtly, the polished veneer of distinguished gentleman giving way to something more vulnerable, more genuine. He wasn't looking at Patricia or the distinguished guests now. His eyes were fixed solely on his granddaughter. "When I was 6, Lily went on, turning a page in her card, Grandpa came to my school play when everybody else was too busy. I was just tree number 3, but he brought me flowers like I was the star. He said sometimes the trees are more important than princesses because they stay standing through every storm." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I caught sight of Michael, standing near his mother, his expression a complex mixture of surprise and something that looked almost like shame. Patricia's perfectly composed facade had slipped completely, her lips pressed into a thin line as she glanced nervously at her social circle watching this unplanned, unfiltered moment. "When I was 7, Lily's voice grew steadier. Grandpa taught me to play chess even though Mom said I was too young. He let me win sometimes, but not always, because he said I wouldn't grow stronger if he didn't give me real challenges. And when I finally beat him for real, he didn't pretend to be sad. He was proud of me for learning from my mistakes." Richard's eyes had grown suspiciously bright under the banquet hall lights. He made no move to interrupt Lily, no attempt to reclaim the polished event that was rapidly transforming into something raw and unscripted. "This year, when Grandpa had his knee surgery," Lily said, and my heart contracted knowing what was coming, "he told me that everybody needs help sometimes, even strong people. He said Mommy was the only one who didn't make him feel weak when she helped him. He said she was teaching me the most important lesson. That family means showing up, even when it's hard, even when nobody says thank you." The room had fallen, completely silent. I could feel tears threatening, but I held them back, unwilling to draw attention away from my daughter's moment of truth. "Grandpa keeps a special box in his study," Lily continued, her voice now reaching every corner of the hushed room. "He showed me once. It doesn't have treasure or money. It has things that remind him of love. There's Grandma's first note to him. There's Dad's first drawing of a building. There's Aunt Charlotte's college medal." She paused, turning to the final page of her card, where she'd carefully glued a photograph. "And there's this picture of me and Mommy making his birthday cake last year. He said it's one of his most special treasures because we made it with love, not because we had to." She held up the card so everyone could see the photograph. Me and Lily in our kitchen, flour dusting our cheeks, laughing as we frosted Richard's favorite lemon cake. A moment I didn't even know had been captured, let alone treasured. "Grandpa taught me that family isn't about who stands in the front row of pictures," Lily said, her clear voice carrying an unmistakable echo of truth that even the most sophisticated adults in the room couldn't ignore. "It's about who stands beside you when you're hurting, who celebrates your tree costume like it's the most important role, who teaches you even when others think you can't learn, and who keeps your picture in their special box." She turned to face Richard directly now, her small shoulders squared with a dignified certainty that belied her 8 years. "Happy birthday, Grandpa. Thank you for teaching me what really matters." For a moment, the entire world seemed suspended in a crystallized silence. No polite applause, no uncomfortable coughs, no strategic redirections. Just the pure, unfiltered truth spoken by a child who saw with perfect clarity what the adults around her had complicated with social hierarchies and unspoken rules. Then Richard did something I had never seen him do in 12 years of family gatherings. He knelt down, his recently repaired knee be damned, to meet his granddaughter at eye level. And there, in front of colleagues and friends and family, the distinguished patriarch of the Harrington family wrapped his arms around Lily and wept openly. "You're right, Lily Pad," he said, his voice thick with emotion and loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're absolutely right." The tableau before us, the powerful businessman humbled by the wisdom of a child, cracked something open in that carefully controlled room. Someone toward the back began to applaud, slowly at first, then with growing conviction. Others joined, some wiping discreetly at their eyes, some abandoning pretense altogether and openly dabbing tears with monogrammed handkerchiefs. I stood frozen, witnessing this transformation, until Richard looked up and found me in the crowd. "Claire," he called, his voice still unsteady. "Claire, please come here." My legs moved before my mind fully processed his request. I found myself standing beside them, Richard still kneeling with one arm around Lily, his other hand reaching for mine. "I've been a fool," he said, looking up at me with reddened eyes. "We all have." Patricia appeared at his side, her perfect composure thoroughly dismantled, mascara slightly smudged beneath her right eye. "Richard, your knee," she began, but stopped when he shook his head firmly. "Some things are more important than appearances, Patricia," he said with quiet authority. "Some things are more important than knees." He squeezed my hand. "Like family. Real family. The kind that shows up." He struggled slightly to stand, accepting my support without hesitation, keeping Lily close against his side. Once upright, he addressed the room, all pretense of the carefully scripted birthday speech abandoned. "I was going to talk about milestones. Today," he said, his voice gaining strength. 7 decades of achievements and acquisitions. But my granddaughter just reminded me of what actually matters." He looked down at Lily with unmistakable pride. "Not what we accumulate, but who walks beside us. Not who we impress, but who we impact." Michael appeared beside me, his expression both stunned and somehow awakened, as if seeing his family clearly for the first time in years. He slipped his arm around my waist, a public acknowledgement that had been rare at these formal family functions. "I've been blessed with success," Richard continued, "but my greatest blessing has been people who loved me enough to show up. My wife Patricia, who has stood beside me for 50 years. My children, who carried forward our family name. My daughter-in-law Claire," his voice caught slightly, "who has shown more grace in the face of our shortcomings than we deserved. And my granddaughter Lily, who sees with perfect clarity what I sometimes forget to see." Patricia was openly crying now, her carefully applied makeup surrendering to emotions too powerful to contain. She reached for my free hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible over Richard's continued speech. "I've been wrong." It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't erase years of subtle exclusion or explain the complex dynamics that had led to this moment. But in her tearful eyes, I saw something I had never fully witnessed before: recognition. She saw me, perhaps for the first time, not as an addition to be tolerated, but as an essential piece of her family's story. Richard raised his glass, abandoning the podium entirely in favor of this unscripted moment of honesty. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had led boardrooms, but now spoke from his heart instead. "Not to 70 years of living, but to what makes life worth living, to showing up, to seeing each other, to the wisdom of children who remind us what we're in danger of forgetting." Glasses rose throughout the room, tears glistening in eyes that had arrived expecting pleasantries, but found profound truth instead. In that moment, surrounded by Michael's arm, Lily's beaming face, Richard's newfound clarity, and even Patricia's tearful acknowledgement, I felt a shift in the very foundation of our family. Something rigid giving way to something more authentic, more resilient. As guests applauded and conversations resumed, now with a different quality, less performative, more genuine, Richard kept Lily close by his side. He pulled me in as well, positioning us prominently as he greeted longtime friends and colleagues. "Have you met my daughter-in-law Claire properly?" he asked each group. "And my brilliant granddaughter Lily? Let me tell you about the chess tournament we've been having." The remainder of the celebration unfolded in ways Patricia could never have planned. the carefully orchestrated schedule gave way to organic moments of connection. The photographer captured images that would never have existed in the original plan. Richard teaching Lily and 2 other children his secret handshake. Michael and I laughing with his sister Charlotte instead of maintaining polite distance. Patricia showing a group of younger women the family photos she carried in her purse, including several of Lily and me that I hadn't known she kept. Late in the afternoon, as the event began to wind down, I found myself sitting beside Patricia at a quiet table near the windows overlooking the golf course. We watched as Richard, ignoring his doctor's recommendations about resting his knee, showed Lily and her newly made friends how to properly swing a croquet mallet on the lawn below. "He keeps that photo in his nightstand, too," Patricia said suddenly, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "The one of you and Lily making his birthday cake. He looks at it every night before he goes to sleep." I turned to her, surprised by this revelation. I didn't know. She nodded, her eyes still fixed on her husband and granddaughter below. "There are many things you don't know, Claire. Many things I should have said years ago." She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the tablecloth, a habit I recognized as her way of organizing her thoughts. I was raised to believe appearances mattered above all else. My mother's highest praise was appropriate, not loving or kind or joyful, just appropriate. She turned to face me directly, her usual perfect posture softening slightly. "When Michael brought you home that first Christmas, so vibrant and different from our world, I was terrified." "Of me?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Of how easily you brought joy into our home," she admitted. "Of how Richard laughed more freely around you than he had in years. Of how you didn't seem constrained by all the rules I had spent decades perfecting." She shook her head slightly. "I mistook my fear for disapproval. I convinced myself I was protecting our family traditions, when really, I was just afraid of change." Below us, Lily had succeeded in hitting the croquet ball through a wicket, prompting a cheer from Richard that echoed up to where we sat. Patricia smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "Lily sees him," she said softly. "The real Richard, not the successful businessman or the family patriarch. Just Richard. The man who still climbs trees despite his bad knee and keeps sentiment-laden treasures in an old cigar box." She turned her gaze back to me. "You see him too. You always have." The acknowledgement hung between us, fragile but authentic. "He's easy to love," I said simply. Patricia's eyes glistened. "Yes, but not always easy to know. I've spent 50 years with that man, and sometimes I wonder if I've been so busy maintaining our image that I missed seeing the most important parts." She reached across the table and briefly touched my hand, a gesture so unexpected I nearly pulled away in surprise. "Thank you for teaching Lily to see what matters, and for showing up even when we made it difficult." It wasn't a grand apology or a complete transformation. Decades of ingrained behavior wouldn't disappear in a single afternoon. But as I sat with my mother-in-law watching my daughter play with her grandfather, I felt the first tendrils of genuine connection taking root where only polite tolerance had existed before. Later, as we prepared to leave, Richard insisted on walking us to our car despite the long day and his troublesome knee. He carried Lily on his shoulders, her emerald dress, hiked up to allow her to sit comfortably, propriety long abandoned in favor of joy. "You'll come for dinner next Sunday," he said, not a question but a gentle assertion. "Just the 4 of you, Michael, you, Lily, and us. No photographers, no guest lists, just family." He winked at Lily. "And my chess partner will bring her." "Bored, won't you, Lily Pad? I've been practicing my knight moves." Lily giggled from her perch. "You're still going to lose, Grandpa." "Probably," he agreed cheerfully. "But I'll learn something in the process, and that's what matters." He carefully lowered her to the ground when we reached our car, then surprised me by pulling me into a tight embrace. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion again, "for raising a child wise enough to teach an old man what he was forgetting." As we drove away, Lily waved enthusiastically from the back seat, her earlier hurt completely transformed into exhilaration. "Grandpa," cried, "Mommy," she said with wonder. "I didn't know grandpas could cry." "Everyone can cry, sweetheart," I replied, watching the Harrington family, our family, growing smaller in the rearview mirror, still standing together and waving until we turned the corner. Sometimes tears are the most honest way to say what matters. Michael reached across the console and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, keeping his voice low so Lily wouldn't hear. "I've been complicit. Standing by while we, pushed you to the edges. I just never knew how to challenge the way things have always been done." I looked at my husband, really looked at him, the conflict in his eyes, the genuine regret in the lines of his face. "An 8-year-old figured it out," I said, not unkindly. "She just spoke the truth." He nodded, acknowledging the gentle rebuke. "She's extraordinary." He glanced in the rearview mirror at Lily, now contentedly flipping through a book in the back seat, like her mother. The simple compliment warmed something long cold within me. "We'll figure it out," I said. "All of us, together." That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, still bubbling with excitement about her grandpa's promise to display her card in his office, where important clients could see real wisdom, I sat on our back porch listening to the spring peepers beginning, their nightly chorus from the small pond behind our property. The day's events washed over me in waves: the hurt, the revelation, the unexpected transformation. My phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Patricia, who had rarely texted me directly before. "The photographer captured something special today. Thought you should have it first." Attached was an image taken just after Lily's speech. Richard kneeling, Lily in his arms, me standing beside them with one hand on my daughter's shoulder and the other clasped in Richard's grip. Our faces were caught in a moment of raw emotion, tears, and smiles, and something indefinable but powerful connecting us. Below the photo, Patricia had added, "The first of many real family portraits, I hope." I stared at the image for a long time, tracing the outline of our unconventional family grouping with my finger. Not perfectly posed, not strategically arranged, just authentically connected. In the background, I could make out Michael moving toward us, Patricia standing slightly apart, but with her composure beautifully broken open, revealing the human beneath the perfect hostess. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Monday would come with its ordinary challenges. Patricia would still struggle with old habits. Michael would still sometimes find himself caught between worlds. I would still occasionally feel like an outsider. But something fundamental had shifted, like a door long locked suddenly opening to fresh air and new possibility. As I sat in the gentle spring darkness, I thought about all the ways love manifests when we're brave enough to recognize it. In a handmade card, in treasured photographs kept in nightstand drawers, in the courage of a child who sees with perfect clarity what adults have complicated. I thought about what it means to truly show up for each other, especially when it's difficult. About how the most profound connections often emerge not from grand gestures, but from moments of simple truth. And I realized that while I had spent years trying to fit myself into the Harrington family narrative, it took my daughter's courage to help us all write a new story together, one where everyone belongs not because they conform to expectations, but because they bring their authentic selves to the table, one where appropriate matters less than present, one where we are all still learning, across generations, what it means to truly see each other. The days following Richard's birthday celebration brought a subtle but unmistakable shift in our family dynamics. Like water gradually reshaping stone, the boundaries between Harrington tradition and authentic connection began to blur and transform. The Monday after the party, a delivery arrived at our doorstep. A chess set carved from marble, each piece a small work of art. The note attached read simply, "For my worthy opponent. Rematch this Sunday? Love, Grandpa." Lily's eyes widened as she unwrapped this treasure. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers reverently over the polished knight. "But I liked our old plastic one too." "That's because you understand something important," I told her, watching as she carefully arranged the pieces. "It's not about what the chess set is made of. It's about who sits across from you while you play." She nodded solemnly, wisdom beyond her years flickering in her emerald eyes. "Like family." "Exactly like family," I agreed. The next surprise came on Wednesday when Patricia called, not to relay information or extend a formal invitation, but simply to talk. The conversation was stilted at first, decades of formality creating awkward pauses and overly polite phrases. But when Lily came home from school and I mentioned who was on the phone, she immediately asked to speak to her grandmother. I handed over the phone and watched in amazement as my daughter launched into an elaborate description of her science project about pond ecosystems, complete with dramatic renditions of frog calls. Instead of the brief, perfunctory response I expected from Patricia, I heard laughter, genuine, uninhibited laughter, filtering through the speaker. When Lily finally returned the phone, Patricia's voice had transformed, warmed by her granddaughter's enthusiasm. "She's remarkable," Patricia said, a new note of sincerity in her tone. Would it be all right if I came to her science fair next week? Richard mentioned you told him about it, and I thought perhaps." The hesitation in her voice, the vulnerability of this request, struck me deeply. This was Patricia Harrington, perfectionist, social architect, guardian of family propriety, asking permission to enter our world on our terms. "She would love that," I replied, my own voice softening. "We both would." When Sunday arrived, we drove to the Harrington home, but something felt different. The imposing colonial house with its manicured hedges and formal garden had always seemed like a museum. To me, beautiful but untouchable. Today, approaching the familiar circular driveway, I noticed subtle changes. A colorful windspinner had been installed near the front garden, something I couldn't imagine the previous Patricia allowing. A pair of well-worn gardening boots sat, unapologetically, by the front door, instead of being hidden discreetly around back. Richard opened the door before we could ring the bell, as if he'd been watching for our arrival. He was dressed in khakis and a comfortable sweater, rather than his usual Sunday attire of pressed slacks and collar shirts. "There's my chess champion," he announced, scooping Lily into a bear hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "And my favorite teacher," he added, embracing me with equal enthusiasm. Inside, the formal dining room with its intimidating mahogany table and ancestral portraits had been bypassed entirely. Instead, Patricia led us to the sunroom, a space I'd glimpsed but rarely been invited to use. Comfortable wicker furniture, with bright cushions, created an intimate setting, and the table was set with colorful pottery rather than the formal china I'd expected. "I thought we might enjoy the garden view," Patricia explained, a hint of nervousness in her voice as she watched for my reaction. "And I made Richard's mother's lasagna recipe, the authentic one, not the modified version we serve at formal dinners." She hesitated, then added, "Michael mentioned it was one of your favorites." My husband squeezed my hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of his role in this thoughtful gesture. "Mom spent all morning on it," he whispered. "Dad said she made 3 batches before she felt it was right." The effort behind this simple meal, the vulnerability of potentially failing at something as ordinary as lasagna after decades of hosting flawless formal dinners, moved me deeply. This wasn't just food. It was Patricia stepping onto unfamiliar ground, risking imperfection to create genuine connection. Dinner unfolded with a relaxed rhythm unlike any previous family meal in this house. Richard told stories I'd never heard before, about his childhood misadventures, about falling in love with Patricia at a university dance where she spilled punch down his shirt, about his early failures in business before finding success. These weren't the polished anecdotes of previous gatherings, designed to impress or instruct. They were simply human moments, shared with affection and occasional self-deprecating laughter. Patricia, too, revealed facets I'd never glimpsed. How she had initially studied art before her parents convinced her to pursue a more suitable degree in social sciences. How she still sketched occasionally when no one was watching. How she had secretly kept every homemade gift her children had ever created despite her outward emphasis on only displaying proper items in their home. "I have something to show you," she said after dessert, addressing Lily directly. "If you're interested." Lily nodded eagerly, always open to new discoveries. Patricia led us upstairs to a room I'd never entered, a small study adjacent to the master bedroom that had always been her private domain. Inside, bookshelves lined the walls, but it was what stood in the corner that captured our attention, an easel holding a half-finished watercolor of the garden pond. "You're an artist!" Lily exclaimed, moving closer to examine the painting. With genuine appreciation, "It looks exactly like the real pond." Patricia's cheeks flushed with pleasure and something like relief. "I wouldn't call myself an artist exactly, just someone who enjoys creating." "That makes you an artist," Lily stated with absolute conviction. "Mr. Chen at school says being an artist isn't about being perfect. It's about sharing how you see the world." Patricia's eyes met mine over Lily's head, a moment of profound understanding passing between us. For years, I had assumed Patricia's perfectionism stemmed from pride or rigidity. Now I wondered if it had been armor instead, protection against vulnerability, against the risk of being truly seen. "Would you like to paint with me sometime?" Patricia asked Lily, her voice carrying an almost youthful hesitation. "I have extra supplies." Lily's face lit up. "Could we paint the frogs at the pond? I'm learning about them in science class." "I'd like that very much," Patricia replied, her customary precision giving way to genuine warmth. While Lily and Patricia discussed potential painting subjects, Richard drew me toward a cabinet in the corner of the room. He opened it carefully to reveal shelves of leather-bound journals. "Patricia has kept a diary every day since we were married," he explained, his voice low with reverence. 50 years of our life together. I've never read them. They've always been private. But last night she showed me this." He gently removed a recent journal and opened it to a marked page. There, in Patricia's elegant handwriting, was an entry dated the day after his birthday celebration. "I have spent decades cultivating the perfect family image, only to discover I was looking at reflections rather than reality. Yesterday, an 8-year-old child showed me what I have been missing, the quiet moments that define true connection. I have been so afraid of imperfection that I nearly perfected myself out of authentic relationship. But it's not too late. Today I choose to see rather than merely look, to listen rather than simply hear, to embrace the beautiful mess of genuine family rather than the sterile perfection of appearances." Richard closed the journal carefully. 50 years together, and I'm still discovering new depths to the woman I married," he said softly, gazing at Patricia as she animatedly discussed color theory with our daughter. "Sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones we've actually seen the least clearly." As the evening continued, Lily and Richard eventually settled into their promised chess match in the living room, their heads bent in mutual concentration, over the marble board. Michael had stepped outside to take an important client call, leaving Patricia and me alone in the kitchen as we prepared coffee. She moved with familiar efficiency, but the rigid perfection of her earlier years had softened into something more natural. When she accidentally spilled coffee grounds on the counter, she simply laughed and wiped them away, rather than the flustered apology I would have expected before. "You know," she said, measuring water with practiced precision, "I spent years trying to teach Michael and Charlotte the importance of maintaining certain standards. How to properly set a table, which fork to use, how to make polite conversation that never strayed into controversial territory." She glanced toward the living room, where Lily's delighted "check" could be heard, followed by Richard's theatrical groan. "But in one afternoon, your daughter taught all of us something far more valuable." I leaned against the counter, curious. What was that? That standards without heart are just empty rituals. She handed me a steaming mug. I always thought I was protecting our family legacy by maintaining traditions. What I didn't realize was that the most important tradition should have been simply loving each other as we are. The simple honesty of this statement, delivered without drama or excessive emotion in Patricia's matter-of-fact way, touched me more deeply than any elaborate apology could have. This wasn't a temporary change of heart in the emotional aftermath of Richard's birthday. This was a woman of profound dignity, acknowledging a fundamental truth she had discovered late, but embraced completely. "It's never too late to create new traditions," I offered, accepting the coffee with a smile. "No," she agreed thoughtfully. "It isn't." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about Sunday dinners, not formal affairs, just family. Would you consider making them a regular occurrence? Perhaps alternating between our homes, so sometimes we come to you?" The suggestion, so simple yet representing such a monumental shift, caught me by surprise. Patricia Harrington, who had spent decades ensuring every social interaction occurred on perfectly controlled territory, was offering to step into our modest craftsman home with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in Lily's artwork. "We'd love that," I said simply, not trusting myself with more elaborate words. We carried our coffee to the living room just in time to witness Lily execute a flawless checkmate that left Richard shaking his head in admiration. "Remarkable," he declared, reaching out to shake Lily's hand formally across the board. "You've been practicing." "YouTube tutorials," Lily admitted with a grin. "There's this grandmaster who explains everything really clearly." "Adapting to new resources," Richard nodded approvingly. "That's how you stay competitive in any field. I could learn from your approach." The easy exchange, the genuine respect flowing between the distinguished businessman and the young girl, created a tableau so different from the strict hierarchy that had previously defined Harrington family interactions. I caught Michael's eye as he returned from his call, witnessing the scene from the doorway. The expression on his face, a mixture of wonder and something like relief, reflected my own feelings. Later, driving home under a canopy of stars, Lily fell asleep in the back seat, the excitement of the day finally overtaking her boundless energy. Michael reached for my hand across the console, his fingers warm and secure around mine. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For not giving up on us, on my family." His voice caught slightly. "For teaching Lily to see beyond the surface, when I was too conflict avoidant to challenge the status quo." I squeezed his hand, understanding the complex emotions behind his words. Sometimes we need to see ourselves through someone else's eyes to recognize what needs to change. "My mother asked me to help her rearrange her formal sitting room tomorrow," he said with a hint of amusement. "She wants to make it less intimidating for future family gatherings. Apparently, she's ordering an art table for Lily to use when she visits." The image of Patricia Harrington dismantling the perfectly arranged sitting room that had intimidated visitors for decades made me smile. "Small steps." "Not so small," Michael countered thoughtfully. "For my mother, rearranging Furniture that's been in the same position for 20 years is practically revolutionary. We drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the sleeping form of our daughter visible in the rearview mirror. "You know what I keep thinking about?" I finally said. "That box Richard keeps, the one with treasured memories. How he had that photo of Lily and me all along." Michael nodded slowly. "I've known about that box my whole life. My father, the businessman, practical and focused, keeping this secret collection of sentimental items." He glanced at me. "But I never knew. Our picture was in there. He never told me." "Maybe he thought he didn't need to," I suggested. "Or maybe he didn't know how to express what those moments meant to him." "Until Lily gave him the words," Michael finished thoughtfully. The next week brought more subtle transformations. Patricia attended Lily's science fair as promised, arriving in a casual outfit I had never seen her wear before, slacks and a simple blouse rather than her usual tailored ensembles. She listened attentively as Lily enthusiastically explained her project on pond ecosystems, asking genuine questions and expressing real interest in the colorful display board covered with hand-drawn illustrations of frogs in various life stages. Afterward, rather than suggesting an appropriate restaurant for lunch as I had expected, Patricia surprised us both. "I packed a picnic," she announced, producing a wicker basket from her car trunk. "I thought perhaps we could eat by the pond in the park while Lily tells me more about her frogs. If that sounds appealing." The hopeful uncertainty in her voice, the genuine effort to enter our world rather than pulling us into hers, moved me deeply. We spent 2 hours on a slightly damp blanket by the community pond, Lily alternating between detailed scientific explanations of amphibian development and enthusiastic searches for tadpoles along the muddy edges. Patricia, immaculately put together Patricia, rolled up her sleeves and knelt beside her granddaughter, peering into murky water with genuine curiosity, heedless of the mud staining her expensive slacks. "I never did this with Michael or Charlotte," she admitted quietly as we watched Lily carefully returning a captured tadpole to the water. "I was always so concerned about schedules and appearances and developmental milestones." She shook her head regretfully. "I never just played." "It's not too late," I pointed out gently. She smiled, a genuine expression that softened the refined elegance of her features into something approachable and warm. "No, it isn't. That's the gift Lily gave all of us, isn't it? The reminder that it's never too late to change the story we're living." The most profound change came unexpectedly, 3 weeks after Richard's birthday. We had just finished dinner when the doorbell rang. Opening it, I found Richard and Patricia standing on our porch, Richard carrying a large, flat object wrapped in brown paper. "Sorry to arrive unannounced," he said, though his expression suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "But we couldn't wait until Sunday to share this." We ushered them into our living room, where Lily immediately began showing Patricia her latest art project, a diorama of the pond ecosystem she'd been building after their picnic adventure. Richard leaned the wrapped package carefully against the wall and motioned for Michael and me to sit. "After my birthday," he began, his voice carrying the measured tone he typically reserved for important announcements. "I did a lot of thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind that truly matters." He glanced at Patricia, who nodded encouragingly. "I've spent decades building a reputation, accumulating achievements, ensuring the Harrington name meant something in business circles. But Lily made me realize I was measuring legacy by the wrong metrics entirely." He gestured toward the wrapped package. "Patricia and I wanted you to have this. It's not just a gift, it's a promise." Michael moved to unwrap the package, revealing a framed canvas that took my breath away. Patricia had painted a family portrait, not a formal, posed arrangement, but a vibrant scene captured from Richard's birthday. In it, Lily stood at the center, her green dress vivid against more muted backgrounds, speaking into a microphone with Richard kneeling beside her. Around them, She had painted the reactions of the family, Michael moving forward from the crowd, me standing with tears visible on my cheeks, Patricia with her perfect composure beautifully breaking open, and various extended family members with expressions ranging from surprise to revelation. What made the painting extraordinary wasn't just its technical skill, though Patricia's talent was undeniable, but the luminous quality she had captured in Lily's face as she spoke her truth. The entire scene was suffused with a gentle glow that emanated from my daughter outward, touching each person around her. At the bottom, in elegant script, Patricia had written, "The moment our family truly began." "It's beautiful," I whispered, touching the frame reverently. "I had no idea you could paint like this." Patricia smiled softly. "There are many things we're still learning about each other, aren't there? That's the journey we're on now." Richard cleared his throat, his voice carrying unexpected emotion. "We've had that formal portrait taken every 5 years, the one with everyone posed perfectly in position according to some outdated hierarchy. Patricia and I have decided to start a new tradition." He gestured to the painting. "Real moments. Real connections. A family legacy built on authenticity rather than appearances." Michael put his arm around me, pulling me close as we all regarded the painting together. "This is going in our living room," he declared, "where everyone who visits can see it." "That's exactly where it belongs," Richard agreed. "Because that's the Harrington legacy I'm proudest of now. Not the buildings with our name on them or the business achievements, but the moment a child reminded us all what truly matters." Later that evening, after Richard and Patricia had left and Lily had gone to bed, Michael and I sat in the soft lamplight of our living room, still absorbing the impact of Patricia's painting and all it represented. "You know," Michael said thoughtfully, "all those years growing up in that house, following all those rules about the right way to be a Harrington, I never realized what we were missing." He gazed at the painting, at the transformation Patricia had captured with such insight. It took Lily to show us there was another way to be a family. I leaned against his shoulder, contemplating the journey we'd undertaken since that birthday party. Not just Richard and Patricia's evolution, but our own. Sometimes the people who lead us forward are the ones we least expect. "The ones who haven't yet learned to be afraid of the truth," Michael agreed softly. As we sat together in the quiet of our living room, the painting seemed to radiate its own gentle light. A reminder that family isn't defined by bloodlines or traditions or perfect photographs. It's created in moments of courage, in the willingness to see and be seen, in the grace to begin again even after years of misunderstanding. And sometimes, it takes the clear, untainted vision of a child to remind us all what we're in danger of forgetting, that the most powerful legacy we leave isn't in what we accumulate or achieve, but in how deeply and honestly we love. That it's never too late to change the story we're living. That the most profound transformations often begin with the simplest truths, spoken from the heart. 6 months after Richard's transformative birthday celebration, autumn painted our small town in brilliant hues of amber and crimson. The changes in the Harrington family had deepened and solidified like roots taking hold after a long drought. What began as tentative steps toward genuine connection had blossomed into something none of us could have imagined that day, when Lily stood up and spoke her truth. On this particular Sunday afternoon, I found myself in Patricia's garden, helping her prepare it for the coming winter. This had become our ritual, these quiet hours working side by side, conversations flowing as naturally as the seasons changing around us. The formal garden with its geometric precision had gradually transformed under Patricia's newly liberated creativity. Native wildflowers now grew alongside classical roses. A small, child-sized pathway wound through what had once been an immaculate lawn, leading to a pond that Richard had installed specifically for Lily's ongoing fascination with amphibians. "Claire," Patricia said, brushing soil from her gardening gloves, I've been thinking about Thanksgiving. I looked up from the bulbs I was planting, tulips that wouldn't bloom until spring, an act of faith in future seasons. What about it? I'd like to do something different this year. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, a practical accessory that the former Patricia would have considered too casual for public wear. Instead of hosting at our house with the formal dining setup and hired servers, I thought perhaps we might gather at the lake house. Make it a family weekend rather than just a meal. The suggestion took me by surprise. Thanksgiving at the Harrington Mansion had been an institution for decades, a showcase event with crystal goblets, heirloom silver, and Patricia's legendary perfect timing ensuring that everything from canapes to dessert appeared precisely on schedule. The lake house, by contrast, was rustic and intimate, with a large open kitchen where everyone could participate in meal preparation. That sounds wonderful, I said sincerely. Lily would love having a few days at the lake. Patricia nodded, her expression thoughtful. I was thinking we might invite your parents as well, and Michael mentioned your sister might be visiting from Colorado. Another unexpected suggestion that revealed how far we'd come. Previously, holidays had been strictly divided. Harrington events were for Harringtons and their approved social circle. The idea of blending our families, of creating space where my more boisterous, less formal relatives would mingle with the Way Harrington clan would have been unthinkable a year ago. They'd love that, I said, trying to imagine my father's hearty laugh echoing through the cedar-beamed halls of the lake house, my mother's homemade cranberry sauce sitting alongside Patricia's, precisely executed sides. Though fair warning, my dad tells terrible jokes and my mom will absolutely try to rearrange your kitchen for optimal workflow. Patricia laughed, a free, unguarded sound that still surprised me whenever I heard it. Richard will be thrilled. He loves terrible jokes, though he'd never admit it. She patted the soil around a newly planted bulb. And your mother is welcome to rearrange anything she likes. I'm learning there's freedom in letting go of control. From inside the house, we heard the sound of Richard's booming laughter followed by Lily's delighted giggle. They were working on their latest project, building a detailed model of the lake house complete with tiny furniture that Richard was teaching Lily to craft by hand. Every Sunday for the past month, they had dedicated hours to this meticulous creation, Richard passing along woodworking skills his own grandfather had taught him. He's different with her, Patricia observed, following my gaze toward the house. More himself, somehow. Or maybe just a version of himself he never gave permission to exist before, I suggested gently. Patricia nodded, wisdom settling in the fine lines around her eyes. We spend so many years constructing identities we think we should have, don't we? Building elaborate facades that eventually become prisons. She looked around at her transformed garden. I keep thinking about what might have been if I'd allowed myself this freedom decades ago. But you found it now, I reminded her. That's what matters. She reached over and squeezed my hand briefly, a gesture that would have seemed impossible a year ago but now came naturally, because Lily showed us the door and you helped us walk through it. Inside, we found Richard and Lily hunched over the dining room table that had been temporarily converted into a workbench. Tiny scraps of wood, miniature tools, and a detailed blueprint surrounded them. Richard wore reading glasses perched on the end of his nose and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Casual attire that the former businessman would never have been seen in outside his most private moments. "Look, Mom," Lily exclaimed when she saw us. "Grandpa taught me how to make tiny hinges for the doors. They actually work," Richard beamed with unabashed pride. "She's a natural craftsman. That level of precision at 8 years old is remarkable." "Almost 9, Lily corrected importantly. Her birthday was still 3 weeks away, but she had begun the countdown as soon as the calendar turned to October. "Almost 9, Richard agreed solemnly. A very significant distinction. As Lily launched into elaborate explanations about their progress on the model, I noticed Michael watching from the doorway, a peculiar expression on his face, wonder mixed with something like grateful disbelief. Later, as we drove home through the gathering dusk, he tried to articulate what he'd been feeling. Growing up, my father was always Mr. Harrington first, he explained, streetlights casting rhythmic patterns across his thoughtful features. Even at home, he maintained a certain formality. I respected him enormously, admired him, wanted to be like him. But I don't know that I ever saw him truly relaxed until now. People contain multitudes, I said softly. Sometimes they just need permission to let different parts of themselves exist. Michael nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I keep thinking about all those Sunday afternoons of my childhood, sitting stiffly in the living room, everyone engaged in appropriate activities, reading improving books, listening to classical music, discussing current events in measured tones. He shook his head, a mixture of amusement and lingering bewilderment in his expression. And now, my father spends his Sundays building miniature furniture and teaching an 8-year-old how to use tiny woodworking tools. Almost 9, I corrected with a smile, echoing Lily's earlier insistence. Almost 9, he agreed, returning my smile. A very significant distinction. In the rearview mirror, I could see Lily had fallen asleep, her head tilted against the window, mouth slightly open in complete relaxation. The simple trust of a child in dreamless sleep, secure in the knowledge that she was loved, that she belonged, that she mattered, not for what she achieved or how she behaved, but simply for who she was. She changed all of us, Michael said, following my gaze in the mirror, with one moment of pure courage. She showed us who we could be, I agreed. The rest was up to us. And we had chosen to become something new, not by rejecting who we were, but by integrating parts of ourselves long suppressed or forgotten. The Harringtons were still the Harringtons, with their appreciation for tradition, their attention to detail, their quiet dignity. But now those qualities enhanced rather than restricted their capacity for joy, for spontaneity, for genuine connection. As promised, Thanksgiving unfolded at the lake house, a sprawling cedar and stone retreat nestled among pine trees on the shores of Lake Windermere. From the moment we arrived on Wednesday evening, it was clear this would be unlike any previous Harrington holiday gathering. Richard greeted us on the front porch wearing jeans and a comfortable sweater, insisting on carrying our bags despite his occasionally troublesome knee. Patricia had transformed the great room with simple, natural decorations, pine cones gathered from the surrounding forest, arrangements of late autumn foliage, and hand-dipped beeswax candles that filled the space with warm golden light. Most surprising of all was the large hand-lettered banner suspended above the stone fireplace. Welcome Morgans and Harringtons, giving thanks together. My parents arrived an hour later, my father's truck looking somewhat out of place among the luxury vehicles in the driveway. I watched with a mixture of amusement and apprehension as my mother, practical, outspoken, allergic to pretension, approached Patricia. Refined, meticulous, raised in an atmosphere of careful social calculation. For a moment, they regarded each other like explorers from different continents, assessing potential dangers and alliances. Then Patricia stepped forward and did something that would have been unthinkable a year ago. She hugged my mother. Not the air-kiss social embrace I'd seen her perform at countless functions, but a genuine welcome. "I'm so glad you're here, Helen," she said warmly. "Claire tells me you make cranberry sauce that puts mine to shame. You'll have to show me your recipe." My mother, momentarily stunned, recovered quickly. "Only if you'll show me how you make those perfect dinner rolls Michael raves about," she countered with a grin. And just like that, a bridge formed between worlds I had always believed would remain separate. By Thursday morning, the lake house hummed with activity. My father and Richard disappeared to the boathouse where Richard claimed to need help winterizing. the sailboat. Though I suspected it was really an excuse for my dad to share his repertoire of increasingly terrible jokes with a new audience. My sister Anna arrived with her family, her 2 toddlers immediately gravitating toward Lily, who assumed the role of benevolent guide to lake house adventures with serene confidence. In the kitchen, the most remarkable collaboration unfolded. Patricia, who had always maintained complete control over her domain, welcomed my mother and me as equal partners in meal preparation. Recipes were compared, techniques debated, traditions explained, and sometimes blended. When my mother questioned the necessity of Patricia's precise measurements, "I just add pinches until it tastes right," Patricia surprised us all by setting aside her measuring spoons with a laugh. "Perhaps I've been missing out on the pinch method all these years," she admitted, watching as my mother adjusted seasonings by instinct rather than formula. There's something to be said for cooking by feel rather than prescription. By late afternoon, as golden light slanted through the tall windows and the aroma of roasting turkey filled the house, our blended family gathered around a table that seemed to physically represent our journey. Patricia had abandoned the formal place settings of previous Thanksgivings in favor of a more relaxed arrangement. Handwritten place cards in Lily's distinctive script marked each person's spot. Candles of varying heights created pools of warm light across the table. The centerpiece combined elements from both families: pine cones collected by Lily and Richard during their morning walk, arranged among the fresh flowers Patricia still preferred, all nestled in my mother's handed-down ceramic bowl. Before the meal began, Richard stood at the head of the table, crystal glass raised in his hand. The setting sun caught the liquid within, transforming simple wine into liquid rubies. In this moment, he embodied both the distinguished patriarch he had always been and the more accessible, authentic man he was becoming. "Traditionally," he began, his voice carrying that familiar note of authority now softened with genuine emotion, "this is where I would offer elegant remarks about gratitude and prosperity." He glanced around the table, taking in each face with deliberate attention. "But this year, I'm learning from my granddaughter that sometimes the simplest truths are the most powerful." He turned to Lily, seated between her 2 adoring cousins. "Lily, would you do us the honor of leading our gratitude this year?" Lily's eyes widened briefly before she nodded with solemn dignity. Standing on her chair to ensure everyone could see her, she took a deep breath. "Grandpa taught me that giving thanks isn't just saying thank you for things. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, and being grateful they're in your story." She looked around the table, her clear gaze touching each person. "I'm thankful for Grandpa teaching me chess and woodworking, and for letting me win. Sometimes, but not always, because that's how I get stronger." Richard beamed, unashamed of the moisture gathering in his eyes. "I'm thankful for Grandma Patricia learning to paint frogs with me even though they're slimy, and for showing me how to make pie crust that doesn't stick to everything." Patricia laughed softly, her hand unconsciously touching the small frog-shaped pin Lily had given her last month. Lily continued around the table, offering specific, personal observations about each family member: my father's fishing lessons, my mother's secret cookie recipes, Michael's bedtime stories, my sister's adventurous spirit, her cousin's endless enthusiasm for mud puddles. When she came to me, her voice softened slightly. "And I'm thankful for my mom, who always sees me even when I'm just tree number 3, who teaches me that courage isn't about being perfect, but about being real, and who showed everyone that love doesn't have to follow complicated rules to be true." In that moment, surrounded by both sides of our now blended family, I felt something profound shift into perfect alignment. The divisions that had once seemed insurmountable, between Harringtons and Morgans, between tradition and authenticity, between appearance and reality, dissolved in the presence of a child's simple wisdom. After dinner, as twilight deepened beyond the windows and conversations broke into smaller, intimate groups throughout the house, I found myself on the dock with Patricia. We sat side by side on the weathered wooden bench, watching the last light fade from the horizon, our breath visible in the crisp November air. "I've been thinking about legacy lately," Patricia said after a comfortable silence. "About what we actually leave behind that matters." I glanced at her profile, elegant even in repose. "What conclusions have you reached?" She smiled, her gaze still fixed on the darkening lake. "That it's not what I thought at all. For decades, I believed legacy was about maintaining appearances, upholding traditions, ensuring the Harrington name retained its particular social cachet." She shook her head slightly. "Now I realize true legacy exists in moments of connection, in the stories we'll leave behind, not about what we achieved, but about who we loved and how well they knew it." From inside the house, laughter erupted. My father's distinctive belly laugh, Richard's deeper chuckle, and the delighted squeals of children. Life happening without orchestration, joy unfolding without planning. "You know," Patricia continued thoughtfully, "I spent so many years afraid of being seen as anything less than perfect. I thought vulnerability was weakness." She turned to me, her expression open in a way I never could have imagined a year ago. "But there's such freedom in being truly known, isn't there? Even with all our flaws exposed." "That's where real connection happens," I agreed, "in the spaces where we're brave enough to be authentic." Patricia reached over and took my hand, a gesture that now felt natural between us. "Thank you," she said simply, "for your patience while we learned how to be a family. For giving Lily the courage to speak truth even when it isn't convenient. For seeing possibility in us even when we couldn't see it ourselves." Before I could respond, the dock vibrated with approaching footsteps. Lily appeared, bundled in her favorite puffy jacket, flanked by Richard and Michael. "Mom! Grandma Patricia!" she called excitedly. "Dad says we might see shooting stars tonight. Can we stay up and watch, please?" Patricia glanced at her elegant watch, the same timepiece that had once governed family gatherings with military precision, ensuring activities never extended beyond their allotted duration. Then she smiled and decisively unbuckled it, slipping it into her pocket. "Some things are worth staying up for," she declared. "I'll get blankets and hot chocolate." An hour later, our entire extended family lay scattered across the dock and adjacent lawn wrapped in blankets, faces turned toward the star-strewn sky. The November chill had deepened, but nobody seemed inclined to retreat indoors. Instead, we huddled closer, sharing warmth and wonder in equal measure. "There!" Lily cried suddenly, pointing upward as a streak of silver etched itself across the darkness. "Did you see it?" Exclamations rippled through our gathered family as more meteors appeared. Brief, brilliant moments of light against the infinite backdrop of night. I felt Lily's small hand find mine in the darkness, squeezing, with excitement at each new sighting. "Mom," she whispered during a lull, her voice carrying the special quality of childhood insights shared in darkness. "Shooting stars are like the truth, aren't they?" "How so?" I asked, intrigued by her metaphor. "They only last a second, but they're so bright everyone sees them. And once you've seen one, you can't pretend it didn't happen. It changes how you see the whole sky." From nearby, I heard Patricia's soft intake of breath, recognition of the profound wisdom in this simple observation. Richard's deeper voice murmured, "Out of the mouths of babes." As we lay there beneath the vast canopy of stars, occasional streaks of light reminding us of both impermanence and possibility, I reflected on the journey our family had taken since that momentous birthday party. How a single act of courage, a truth spoken from the heart of a child, had illuminated what had always been present but hidden, the capacity for authentic connection that existed within each of us, waiting to be acknowledged. Like shooting stars, such moments of radical honesty may be brief and sometimes even uncomfortable in their brilliance. But they change everything. They remind us that beneath our carefully constructed identities and social performances exists something far more valuable, our true selves, capable of deeper love and connection than any perfect facade could ever achieve. Later that night, after Lily had finally succumbed to sleep, our extended family gathered in the great room. The fire cast dancing shadows across faces now relaxed in genuine comfort with one another. Richard, seated in his favorite leather chair, with Patricia perched on its arm, raised his glass in a final toast. "To shooting stars," he said, his voice carrying both authority and newfound gentleness, "and to the brave souls who help us see them." Around the circle, glasses rose in agreement, each person reflecting on their own journey toward authenticity. And in that moment of shared understanding, I realized that the truest legacy we leave isn't found in perfect family portraits or carefully maintained appearances. It lives in the courage to be genuinely seen, the wisdom to recognize what truly matters, and the love that flows most freely when we finally let go of who we think we should be and embrace who we actually are. The Harringtons were still the Harringtons. The Morgans were still the Morgans. But together, we had become something new. A family defined not by surnames or social standing, but by our willingness to see and be seen, to speak and hear truth, to grow beyond the limitations of our past stories into something more authentic, more connected, more real. And it had all begun with an 8-year-old girl who stood up at a birthday party and reminded everyone what really mattered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.